Hey guys, welcome to this video on Pluto in the 11th house. If you have Pluto in the 11th house in your natal chart in astrology, this video is for you. I'm Cassandra the Saffron Sage, helping you use astrology to evolve, and today we're talking about Pluto in the 11th. So first we'll talk about the mythology of Pluto, then we'll talk about the meaning of Pluto as a planet, the 11th house, then we'll get into the definition of Pluto in the 11th. So let's get into the video. So for the mythology of Pluto, when I was doing research into this, the one story that did pop up the most was the Persephone myth. And so the Persephone story is about how Pluto kidnapped Persephone. Pluto was lord of the underworld, so he took her to the underworld where she became queen. The way the story goes is that he kidnapped her. Her mom, Ceres or Demeter, depending on which myth you follow, got upset and came to find her daughter and save her and bring her back home. And Pluto had to make this deal that he would let her go. And he did make the deal. But he was able to get her to eat pomegranate seeds, which, so the story goes, maybe she didn't know this sealed her fate in staying in the underworld, because for every seed she ate, she had to stay a certain amount of time. So then when Pluto let her go, then she only had to go 6 months. So now Persephone goes 6 months to stay with her mother Demeter above ground in the earth, and then she goes for 6 months down to do her stay in the underworld. Demeter, being known as like the mother, the nurturer, the one who harvests the crops, is happy when her daughter is there. And so for the 6 months that Persephone is with Demeter, this is when we have spring. This is when things grow. Things are bountiful. And then when Persephone goes to the underworld, those 6 months are known as winter, where Demeter or Ceres is, just so depressed, so bereft without her daughter that she can't do anything. And that is when we have winter. So Persephone, the Persephone myth is not just about a poor damsel in distress who gets taken away and kidnapped. One disclaimer here is that there are some versions of this story that say that Persephone went willingly. So the moral of the Persephone myth here is that the maiden turns into the mother, who turns into the crone. It's about the innocent, naive young girl who doesn't know how to be responsible for her own self, becoming queen of that underworld by mastering her subconscious mind and becoming a woman. And so again, this is not necessarily a damsel in distress story as much as it is a story about coming into power, making the journey from powerlessness to power, which is really what Pluto is all about. So more little details about this story that I didn't know. One is that the reason Pluto fell in love with Persephone is that Cupid shot a dart at him. And because he didn't want him to be lonely in the underworld watching over all these departed souls. More things about Pluto. Pluto is known as the god of wealth because jewels and diamonds come from underground. Pluto in Roman mythology. It's Hades in Greek mythology. And so Pluto's identity was really comprised of these two entities. One is Hades, but the other one is Pluton, also known as Dispater, who had power over the underworld and mineral wealth. The underworld being the resting place of departed souls. A little bit about Pluto's family tree. Here is that Pluto's dad was Saturn, his brother was Jupiter, who really freed him. Jupiter freed Pluto from the wrath of Saturn, so that's something to know. He was also brothers with Poseidon, and his sisters were Ceres, Juno, and Vesta. So that being said, that means Persephone was his niece. So now that we've talked about the mythology of Pluto, let's talk about what Pluto means as a planet in the chart in astrology. The first thing to know is that Pluto by sign is going to outline generational themes. These are going to be, and this is because Pluto moves very, very slowly. The transit of Pluto is 14 to 30 years. So because it is so slow, it represents generational themes. These are not aspects of the personality wherever your Pluto is. Where we find Pluto by house, this is how you moved through a past life. these are the themes that you're going to be probably most comfortable with, and the way that you could potentially transform in this life. Now, just because you have Pluto in a house does not mean that house of your life, that area of life, is guaranteed to transform, because the transformation isn't guaranteed. The Pluto placement in the chart just represents the potential, but doesn't mean you're going to realize that potential. Now, there is something called the polarity point, and this is from Jeffrey Wolf Green, and basically it's the opposite point, and it represents the soul evolution in this life. Now, this is how we transform and transcend the limits of the past, and you know, that's what it is. So then there's the polarity point. The polarity point of anyone's Pluto is the opposite point that it lands in the chart. So, you know, if your Pluto is at 20 degrees of Capricorn, then the polarity point is 20 degrees Cancer. It's the point directly across. And this is the energy to sort of learn how to allow, learn how to master, learn how to accept and work with, to really sort of realize the potential of your Pluto. And again, not everyone will do this, right? Some people will sort of stay in that energetic comfort zone of where their Pluto is by sign and house. So now let's talk about the nature of the 11th house. So in astrology, the 11th house is a sextile house. A sextile house is one that follows an angular house. The sextile houses are the 2nd, 5th, 8th, and 11th. The 11th house is known to represent friends, groups, alliances, hopes, and dreams. It's where we find things like any group of people we belong to, including professional associations, colleagues, our friends in general, any community projects we join, also any kind of social purpose we have. For people who have an audience of any kind, from social media people to politicians, their audience will be found in that 11th house as well. Another signification of the 11th house that isn't perhaps talked about quite as often, using something called derivative houses, is that it is second from the 10th. So it also can represent gains from our career, money we make from the work that we do. So that is the definition of the 11th house. So now let's move on to what it means when you have Pluto in the 11th house. If you have Pluto in the 11th house, then you are learning in this lifetime how to break free from what other people think. Since wherever Pluto lands, we tend to be very attached to this thing or the activities that are represented by that house, Pluto in the 11th house is naturally going to care a lot about what people think. So you may come into this life with a fear of what people think that is more intense, a care or a desire for people to think a certain thing of you that is, a stronger desire there. It is important for people with Pluto in the 11th to keep the opinions of others in perspective so that it doesn't become too much, because there is a tendency with this placement to put too much weight on that area of life, which is true of every Pluto. So people with Pluto in the 11th are sort of learning how to stop letting people define them, learning how to disconnect from things that confine them, especially when it comes to their identity. So because this lifetime for people with Pluto in the 11th is about learning how to break free of things and people who tell them what to do, this means that they may have some negative experiences with these sorts of topics. So they could have situations where they go along to get along in a group setting, and at some point in life they need to change that. In the past lives, they've learned enough about how to disconnect from things that confine them, how to detach. Sometimes in the past, there are people who were rebels or revolutionaries or lived life as an observer. Sometimes they can do things in a unique or innovative way that threatens people. So this can be almost like a double-edged sword, because you have this desire to fit in, desire to connect, or a strong desire to disconnect. Either way, there's a desire here. But then there's also an innate tendency to be different or want to be different. And so it's almost like there's a complex here of what other people think. On one hand, wanting everyone to like you, wanting to be liked, which is an innate human need. But with Pluto there, that desire is intensified. And then also wanting to be able to be yourself and be unique and embrace the things that make you different. So in past lives, you could have been the person who already was deconditioned, already had owned and enjoyed your own uniqueness and lived your life as a one who's like on the leading edge in some way, either on the leading edge through the beliefs you had, like people who were revolutionaries of their time. You could have been one of those people. Your soul remembers not fitting in. Your soul remembers being in this life and having no way to fit in. Now, sometimes you can have these exact same things play out in the exact same way in this life, where in some ways you are sort of ahead of the crowd, think differently than most people, think in a way that just isn't socially acceptable yet, live your life in a way or have values that people just don't totally get. And even though on one hand you may already have freed yourself of social conditioning or the need to just do things because other people do them, there's also there can be this feeling of isolation because it's there's no way you're fitting in. With the things you think and the things you do, it's it's not going to happen. It can be hard for this Pluto placement to see the possibility of ever integrating into society, and for some people with this Pluto, they won't even want to. So this is one where it can go one extreme or the other. The one extreme being I'll do anything to fit in, the other extreme being I'll do anything to not fit in. Whatever it takes, I'm not going there. I'm not going to be like everybody else. So the crises of this Pluto usually involve not fitting into groups or having conflicts in groups. Or they can also be things about other people's ideas, shocking you in some way. Shocking situations involving friends, shocking situations involving social circles. Because this placement is about detaching, right? The ability to detach from the people, the groups, the belief systems that are holding you back from your highest personal growth. Sometimes these are the challenges that you're going to have the most, is seeing the need to let go of a group of friends or seeing the need to release some identity, some way that you belong to a certain group. Sometimes people with this Pluto in the 11th can have phases where they end up being isolated. Now, sometimes this is actually part of this evolutionary process of learning how to be flexible in what you think. This placement is not just about releasing the people that might be holding you back, but also releasing the ideas that are keeping you stuck. So because of that, if you have some very, very, very strong ideas that you are not willing to let go of, and you end up all alone all the time, then that aloneness, that isolation could be a sign that there is some kind of fixed or rigid belief system or idea to consider objectively reviewing and releasing. Because remember, that is sort of the purpose of this placement, to objectively see yourself and let go of the things that no longer serve you. If you are surrounded by people with this placement, that is probably an indicator that you have done some work on this placement or you are on the right track in some way. Unless the people you are surrounded with are all telling you to believe differently and they are all sort of attacking your belief system. So this is sort of the evolutionary purpose of that isolation, is that it forces you to consider what ideas are making people not want to be around you. So the thing is that the one of the challenges of this placement can also be the gift, because there is a uniqueness here. And this individuality is perhaps stark, that is striking. This can either reflect back to people in a positive way or a negative way what is unique and different about themselves. So if you're surrounded by people who are super, super conditioned, people who are plugged into the matrix, and you have this placement, they're going to hate you because they're not going to want to see what's unique about themselves. They're going to, especially if they're people who value fitting in. I shouldn't say plugged into the matrix because, for 11th house Pluto people, there is a uniqueness here. There is a need for that. But not everybody wants to see what's different and unique about themselves. And so sometimes this placement will have conflicts because of that as well. With this placement, there is a capacity, a potential to lead groups, leadership in groups. There is a powerful ability here to understand the needs of a group, to really master group dynamics. But in order to do that, you'd have to be, working through the challenges of this placement, which brings us to the polarity point. The polarity point for Pluto in the 11th house is the 5th house. The 5th house being all about creative self-expression. And the way that this shows up for people with Pluto in the 11th house is there is a need to learn how to carry out your goals. There is a need to learn how to take charge of your ideas and go after them. Really not just have that future vision of your life, but also be able to take that next step, because this is one of the hard things for this placement. It's super easy for Pluto in the 11th house people to think about all the future possibilities and to, imagine it and dream it and be connected to that future. Much, much harder for 11th house Pluto people to put those things into action, to do something right now, to do something today that pushes that dream forward. So in order to honor this placement, the polarity point, one of the things that people with Pluto in the 11th house really need to do is they really, really need to make sure they're not waiting for something. They're not waiting for permission. They're not waiting for approval. They're not waiting for someone to say, oh yeah, that's a good idea. You should go do that. Not waiting for someone to believe in you. You gotta believe in you. There is so much power that comes from knowing you are different, you are unique, and embracing that. And it's like the difference between saying like, I'm different or I'm different. It's just, it's much easier said than done, but it's really about owning your differences and allowing it to be okay that you are different than other people in certain ways, allowing it to be okay the ways that you are the same as other people, because naturally this Pluto in the 11th will probably have hang-ups on both sides of those things. This is a huge reframe for people with this placement who have spent their lives feeling weird, different, or alienated. And it really is going from, oh, I'm different, to I'm different. My life is different. My past was different. The way I see things is different. And really to be able to drop the self-judgment that can make this be a negative experience. And once you get this, you can be the most powerful agent for change. Also, people with Pluto in the 11th house can tend to have certain themes of ending friendships throughout their life. There are some lessons to be learned here in letting things go, when to let someone go, when not to, and more importantly, what makes a good friend in the first place. Oftentimes, people with Pluto in the 11th house will maybe only have a few friends at a time, and they may even sometimes go through cycles of life where they don't have any friends at all. For people with Pluto in the 11th house, once you own this placement, by going after what you want, setting your own goals, and being willing to release whatever doesn't come with you, especially the friendships that don't come with you, that is when you can create so much positive change in the world. You can step into your own power. You can lead groups. You can do things that uplift society and have the potential to make lasting effects on the groups that you work with or the groups that you are involved with. It's the ability to bring positive change to whatever field you go into. Sometimes too, people with Pluto in the 11th, once they master that polarity point, can also end up being a voice for groups of people that are not represented. You can be someone who brings people together. You can promote understanding of different people, different backgrounds, different belief systems, and really create more harmony between different people. So just to recap, Pluto in the 11th is going to naturally be fixated on their relationship to groups of people, whether it be through a desire to fit in or a desire to disconnect. And some of the main lessons here are learning, what their goals are in life, how to independently go after their dreams and express themselves and be themselves unapologetically, and to let whoever gels with that stay, and be willing to disconnect with people, groups, or situations that don't allow that self-expression. It's also letting go of the rigid ideas that might be keeping you apart from other people, finding a balance between those two extremes. And once you've mastered, or at least begun to master, this polarity point and this Pluto, you have so much potential to be a force of positivity and upliftment to groups of people. Whatever field you end up going into, you have the ability to own your uniqueness, own your differences, and no longer let the feelings of being different feel like a negative thing. It's dropping the association to that being bad. So you go from I'm different and that's bad to I'm different. And there's nothing attached there. So again, releasing these attachments, becoming an agent for change, and pursue your own goals in a way that allows people to be more connected and somehow creates change and following your own dreams to make the world a better place. That is what the 11th house Pluto is all about. So let me know if you relate to this. I always love hearing from you. Comment below. And you can also join my free webinar to find the gifts in your chart using the link below. And I will see you all in the next video.